Power rarely arrives with noise. It slips in through a glance you hold a second longer than expected, the air between two hands that almost touch, the awareness that something sacred is about to happen, and might not. Desire is not a shout, it's the quiet gravity that makes two people lean closer without deciding to. That is the paradox, the deepest connections feel inevitable, yet they are crafted with care. Casanova is more myth than man now, a mirror we hold to our hunger. People imagine him as reckless, but his real legacy is psychological, attention as an art, presence as a promise, restraint as language. He understood that attraction grows not from pressure but from precision, from the way you read a room, a face, a breath, from the patience to wait until closeness is not taken but welcomed. The myth says conquest. The truth says consent, curiosity, and timing. The myth says heat. The truth says warmth that deepens slowly, like a candle turning a dark room golden. Touch is the quietest language we speak. Even before words, infants learn the world through skin, safety, warmth, trust. As adults, our nervous systems still listen. A palm on a table, a sleeve brushing past in a hallway, a gentle greeting that lingers just long enough to register and then releases, these moments prime the mind. The heart notices signals the tongue never mentions. Touch is not a trick, it's a channel. Used without care, it can confuse or harm. Used with reverence, it tells the body, you are seen. You are safe. That message is rare enough to feel like magic. There is simple science beneath the spell. When we feel known, our guard softens. When we feel safe, our breath deepens. When connection is mutual, the body produces warmth, chemistry, yes, but also meaning. Subconscious bonding is not sorcery, it is emotional alignment. The eyes match pace. Voices find a similar rhythm. Micro-movements synchronize, like two dancers discovering they already know the steps. The mind takes notes. The body remembers. Nothing is forced. Everything is felt. What makes the forbidden so irresistible is not danger itself but scarcity. We want what feels rare, attention that is undivided, touch that is earned, intimacy that is chosen. When contact is restrained, when a hand pauses just shy of another and then retreats with a small smile, the imagination does what no technique can, it writes a story. The story is where longing lives. The line is thin, and the rule is absolute, desire without consent is harm. The most powerful touch is the one that waits to be invited, that asks without asking, that can be refused without punishment and accepted without fear. Subconscious seduction, in its honest form, is not about control, it is about presence. It is the discipline to slow down, to listen for tension and respect it, to notice the moment when someone's shoulders relax because your words carry no demand. It is the courage to let silence do the talking. It is the wisdom to understand that intimacy has an intelligence of its own. You don't chase it, you create the conditions where it wants to stay. Casanova's real method was not manipulation but attunement, noticing what someone cares about and meeting them there, letting conversation be a soft ladder into trust, allowing touch to arrive as a natural conclusion, not a shortcut. In a world addicted to speed, the rarest gift is patience. In a culture flooded with noise, the rarest signal is sincerity. When you combine both, attraction ceases to be an argument you try to win. It becomes a quiet alignment you both choose. If this resonates, stay with me. In the next chapter, we'll move from myth to practice, ethical, simple, and deeply human ways to build emotional safety and ignite real chemistry without games. Like, subscribe, and keep listening. The darker arts only become dangerous when we refuse to understand them. Here, we'll learn to use them with clarity, boundaries, and care. Chapter 1: The Psychology Behind Touch. Every story of human connection begins before words. Before language, before logic, before trust was earned by promises, it was earned through touch. A newborn doesn't understand sentences or logic, but it recognizes warmth, pressure, and rhythm. A hand on the chest, a gentle hold, it says, "You're safe." That ancient signal has never left us. It's written deep into our biology, older than thought, older than love itself. Touch is the first form of communication and the last we forget. Long before we learn to lie, we learn to reach. That's what makes it so powerful, and so dangerous. It can comfort or control, awaken or confuse, depending on the intent behind it. A single touch can bypass everything we know about a person and reach the hidden part of us that still craves safety and recognition. The body doesn't argue, it responds. And in that response lies both connection and vulnerability. When someone touches you, your brain doesn't stop to debate meaning, it reacts. Within milliseconds, chemicals are released: dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline. Dopamine gives that quick spark of pleasure, a small reward that says this feels good. Oxytocin builds the bridge of trust, softening the mind's defenses, whispering this person is safe. Adrenaline, when used carefully, adds the rush of excitement, the thrill that turns attention into desire. Together, they form an invisible cocktail of emotional priming. It's not magic, it's neuroscience. But the result often feels like magic because it's felt, not understood. Casanova knew this long before the science caught up. He was not a scientist, but an observer of human nature. He knew that touch wasn't about pressure, it was about timing, rhythm, intent. He treated every gesture like music. Too fast, and the melody breaks. Too slow, and the silence grows cold. The art was in knowing when to touch, where to touch, and when not to. What made him unforgettable wasn't what he did, it was what he made others feel. And those feelings were written directly into the nervous system. Touch bypasses logic because it speaks the body's oldest language. Logic lives in the neocortex, the newest, most rational part of the brain. But touch belongs to the limbic system, the ancient emotional core that governs attachment, fear, and desire. That's why even the most intelligent, cautious people can be disarmed by something as small as a hand brushing theirs. The mind may resist, but the body listens first. The truth is, not all touch feels the same. There is comfort touch, the kind that soothes, reassures, grounds you. A friend's hand on your shoulder. A hug that melts tension. It carries warmth, not agenda. Then there is control touch, the kind that guides your movement, claims your space, creates invisible dominance. A hand that stays too long, a grip that lingers just enough to signal power. Both can feel intimate, but only one is rooted in empathy. The difference lies in energy, one gives, the other takes. In subtle ways, every society teaches its people how to interpret touch. Some cultures shake hands firmly to signal confidence. Others bow to show respect. But beneath the customs, the same truth remains: touch defines the boundary between self and other. When that boundary is crossed with awareness, it becomes connection. When it's crossed with manipulation, it becomes control. The line between them is razor-thin and often invisible. That's what makes the psychology behind touch both fascinating and dangerous. Think about moments that have stayed with you: someone's hand finding yours in a dark crowd, a parent's palm smoothing your hair when you were small, a partner's touch that made time slow down. None of these required words. The body remembers them because they shaped how safe you felt in the world. Every touch you receive is stored in your nervous system like emotional code. When someone touches you later, that code awakens. You're not just feeling them, you're feeling every echo of safety or fear you've ever known. In the realm of seduction, this becomes a double-edged sword. A manipulator uses touch to create false safety, to hack the body's code. A genuine connection uses it to build trust slowly, to mirror empathy and warmth. One drains, the other fills. But both use the same biological pathways. That's why so many fall for those who feel different, because their presence triggers the chemistry of attachment before the logic of caution can intervene. Casanova's real mastery wasn't physical, it was psychological. He could read when someone's body softened or stiffened, when they leaned in or pulled away. He adjusted in real time, listening with his eyes and responding with his silence. He didn't force attraction, he cultivated it, like a flame protected from the wind. To him, touch was not a weapon, it was an invitation. But he also knew its power to blur boundaries, to make people feel things they couldn't explain. That awareness was his greatest seduction, and his greatest sin. Touch awakens instinct because it calls out the animal in us, the part that reads energy, warmth, safety. That instinct is neither good nor bad, it's neutral, waiting to be guided by intention. In the hands of love, it becomes healing. In the hands of manipulation, it becomes control. The same key that unlocks intimacy can also unlock obedience. The same chemical that bonds a mother to her child can bind a victim to their abuser. That is the dark symmetry of human psychology. The power to connect is always the power to control. Understanding this doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. It helps you see the invisible mechanics beneath every handshake, every embrace, every casual brush of the arm. It teaches you to notice not just what someone does, but why you feel what you feel. When you can see that clearly, touch stops being a mystery, it becomes a mirror. Chapter 2: Casanova's Hidden Code of Influence. The most powerful influence is invisible. It doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand, doesn't chase. It simply arrives, as if it were always meant to be there. That's the paradox of true seduction. The moment it feels planned, it breaks. But when it feels spontaneous, natural, effortless, that's when it's at its most calculated. Casanova understood this better than anyone. He didn't rely on looks, wealth, or status. His real weapon was observation, the ability to see a person completely before they even realized they were being studied. Before he ever reached for a hand, he had already mapped the emotional landscape of the person standing before him. He knew what made them smile, what made their voice tremble, what made their eyes drift when they were lost in thought. To him, seduction was never about touch, it was about timing. He treated every encounter as a language to decode. The smallest movements spoke volumes. A tilt of the head could reveal curiosity. A nervous laugh might signal both interest and fear. He watched the body's rhythm like a musician listens to a melody, waiting for the perfect moment to join in. This was his hidden code of influence: read before you reach, understand before you act, connect before you claim. He knew that when someone feels seen, they open doors that logic alone could never unlock. Modern psychology now calls this emotional mirroring, the subconscious act of reflecting someone's energy back to them. When we mirror others, we speak the language of safety. Their mind whispers, "This person understands me," and barriers begin to dissolve. Casanova mastered this centuries before science gave it a name. He would subtly match tone, posture, breathing. If his companion spoke softly, he softened his voice. If they were tense, he slowed his movements until they mirrored his calm. Without a word, he created a shared rhythm, and rhythm is what builds trust. But empathy alone wasn't enough, he knew how to weaponize it with precision. What made him dangerous was his ability to strategically empathize. He didn't just feel what others felt, he guided it. Like a painter controlling the light in a scene, he could darken or brighten the emotional tone until it suited his purpose. When he sensed fear, he offered reassurance. When he sensed confidence, he introduced mystery. He was never predictable, and unpredictability breeds fascination. Seduction, he believed, had a rhythm, like breathing in and out, like the rise and fall of a tide. Too much intensity and the wave breaks too soon. Too little, and it never reaches the shore. Timing was everything. The pause before the compliment. The silence after a shared glance. The delay that makes someone lean closer because they need to know what comes next. Casanova's rhythm was deliberate but never stiff. He made preparation look like impulse, rehearsal look like fate. That illusion of spontaneity was his greatest performance. Every gesture, every line, every smile appeared effortless, but it was all calculated to feel natural. He understood a truth that still holds today: people fall in love not with the perfect act, but with the illusion of imperfection. The way a person hesitates before saying something brave, the way laughter breaks tension, the way emotion flickers and then hides again. These moments feel real, unpolished, human. Casanova learned to stage them without being caught. The result was disarming authenticity that wasn't always authentic. He played not with words, but with energy. When he entered a room, he didn't try to dominate it, he adjusted to it. He made people feel that he belonged there, and soon they wanted him to stay. His influence was silent because it worked through atmosphere. He didn't command attention, he attracted it, slowly, magnetically. The more you watched him, the more you realized he wasn't trying. And because he wasn't trying, you couldn't look away. There's something profoundly psychological about that kind of presence. It feeds on curiosity. When someone is both open and unreadable, our minds chase them. We want to decode them, understand what makes them so calm while the rest of us feel restless. Casanova mastered this paradox. He gave just enough to awaken curiosity, but never enough to satisfy it. Desire lives in the gap between what is shown and what is withheld. He also understood tension, not as conflict, but as electricity. Tension is what makes touch powerful, words meaningful, and silence magnetic. Without it, there is no spark. But tension must be managed carefully. If it's forced, it becomes pressure. If it's held too long, it becomes discomfort. Casanova's art was to ride that edge, to let the air between two people hum with possibility, never breaking it too soon, never letting it fade. When you study his encounters, you realize he didn't seduce everyone, he seduced the moment itself. His charm wasn't a mask he wore, but a mirror he held up. Each person who looked into it saw what they most wanted to see: affection, excitement, danger, understanding. That's why they called him irresistible. He wasn't showing them himself, he was showing them themselves. In modern psychology, we call this projection, the idea that we fall for the parts of ourselves we recognize in another person. Casanova's genius was that he let people project onto him freely. He didn't rush to define himself. He gave them space to build their own illusion, and then he lived inside it for as long as it served the connection. It was both his gift and his curse. Those who can read the human mind deeply are often the loneliest, because they see through illusions they themselves create. His code of influence can still be applied today, but ethically, it requires awareness. It's about reading people not to manipulate them, but to connect with them genuinely. When you notice their rhythm, you can move in harmony instead of collision. When you sense their emotions, you can speak to them instead of talking past them. The difference between Casanova's light and his shadow lies in why he used what he knew. Influence without empathy is manipulation. Influence with understanding is art. Casanova's hidden code wasn't about power over others, it was about presence. The ability to dissolve into a moment so completely that others feel safe revealing who they are. That's what every human being secretly wants, to be seen without judgment, to be felt without explanation. He gave people that gift, even if for a short while, and that's why they never forgot him. Chapter 3: The Subconscious Language of Skin. The skin remembers everything. It remembers who made you feel safe and who made you flinch. It remembers warmth, pressure, rhythm, the invisible fingerprints of emotion that never fade. Long after words are forgotten, the body keeps the record. That's the paradox: what we think we've buried, our skin still whispers to us. Every touch tells a story, and every story leaves a trace. Casanova understood this in a way that bordered on the supernatural. To him, skin was not just a surface, it was a language. It could be read, written on, and rewritten. A fleeting touch across a hand, a playful brush of the shoulder, a pause before pulling away, these were not accidents. They were sentences in a conversation deeper than speech. He knew that the body speaks long before the mouth does, and if you can listen to that silent vocabulary, you can reach someone's subconscious before they even realize it. In dark psychology, we call these micro-moments, those brief, seemingly meaningless touches that plant desire without permission. They work because they slip beneath awareness. When a gesture is too small to analyze, the conscious mind ignores it, but the nervous system doesn't. It notices warmth, movement, proximity. A brush of the arm might last less than a second, yet it can release a flicker of oxytocin, the hormone of trust and bonding. A moment that passes in silence can leave a lingering emotional echo, like perfume on the air. This is the essence of tactile conditioning. Each touch, when paired with emotion, becomes an anchor in the mind. Imagine you're laughing with someone and they briefly touch your arm. That moment fuses physical contact with joy. Later, even a similar touch from them, no words spoken, can bring that emotion back. The body learns to associate them with warmth. It's classical conditioning, but not with bells and dogs, with heartbeat and skin. Casanova mastered this. He understood that to build desire, you don't need to overwhelm the senses. You only need to pair the right feeling with the right touch, and let the body do the remembering. But there's a darker layer to this science. Because what the skin remembers can be rewritten, or exploited. Just as affection can be conditioned, so can dependency. The same way the body learns to feel safe with one person, it can learn to crave their validation. A manipulator uses this to blur the line between comfort and control. One day, their touch calms you, the next, it restores balance after they've broken it. The body begins to link relief not to peace, but to the one who caused the tension. This is the trap of emotional conditioning. Pain and pleasure begin to share the same face. Casanova was not cruel, but he walked dangerously close to this border. He knew the body's memory could be used to keep him alive in someone's thoughts long after he was gone. A whispered compliment fades, but a carefully timed touch lingers in the body's archive. The mind may say, "I shouldn't miss him," yet the skin remembers differently. It aches for the pattern it once learned. That's why true seduction doesn't end when the night does, it lives on in the echo the body can't erase. Think of how your body reacts to certain people. There are those whose presence makes your muscles soften, whose nearness feels like gravity pulling you closer. And there are others whose approach makes your shoulders tighten, even when they smile. That's the skin's intuition, the subconscious intelligence that speaks in shivers and goosebumps. It's ancient, precise, and rarely wrong. You can fool the eyes, but not the skin. It knows when energy is off. It knows when warmth is real or borrowed. The human body holds an internal archive of every emotional temperature it's ever experienced. The comfort of a mother's hand, the sting of betrayal, the steady reassurance of someone who stayed when you broke down, all of it lives just beneath the surface. That's why the smallest touch can reopen old wounds or reawaken forgotten desires. The body doesn't ask permission before remembering. It just reacts. This is why Casanova's power was not about physicality, but emotional precision. He understood that touch without understanding is noise. But touch delivered at the right moment, with the right emotional tone, is symphony. He would let silence do most of the talking, letting tension rise naturally until the smallest contact carried the weight of everything unsaid. A fingertip on the wrist could feel like a confession. A pause before letting go could feel like a promise. He didn't need to touch often. He needed to touch correctly. The skin, in his world, was not only a bridge, it was a battlefield. Every connection carries conflict, the desire to be known versus the fear of exposure. The more someone touches your skin, the more access they have to the unconscious self you guard so fiercely. That's why forbidden touch, touch that feels both wrong and irresistible, creates such powerful tension. It forces the mind into chaos. Do I want this, or do I fear it? That confusion feeds obsession. The line between pleasure and guilt, between affection and surrender, becomes blurred until the only truth that remains is the intensity of the feeling itself. But this power cuts both ways. The same sensitivity that makes skin a tool of influence also makes it sacred. Every touch you give leaves a trace, some fleeting, some permanent. To use it carelessly is to write on someone's soul with fire. True mastery lies not in learning how to control, but how to respect. Casanova, for all his flaws, knew this. His touch wasn't about possession, it was about presence. He touched to communicate, not to claim. And that's what made him unforgettable. In the end, the subconscious language of skin is not about manipulation, it's about awareness. It's the understanding that every gesture carries meaning, every contact carries memory. When you realize this, you move differently through the world. You become mindful of what your presence does to others. You learn to speak through silence, to connect through stillness, to influence not by force, but by feeling. Chapter 4, The Forbidden Element, Why Taboo Intensifies Desire. There's something intoxicating about what we can't have. The moment a door is marked, "Do not enter," the mind begins to imagine what lies behind it. That's the paradox of desire. It doesn't bloom from abundance, but from restriction. What's forbidden calls to us more powerfully than what's offered, because it awakens the deepest instinct we have, the hunger for freedom. The human heart has always been drawn to the edge. We crave the spark that comes from stepping close to danger without falling in. Every law, every moral code, every whispered warning only fuels the imagination. Tell someone they shouldn't want something, and you give that desire a new kind of power, the power of defiance. This is not corruption, it's psychology. We are wired to push against barriers, to test limits, to feel alive in the tension between what we want and what we're told we shouldn't want. Casanova built his legend in that space. He lived in a world of rigid morals and unspoken rules, yet he knew how to dance along the line that separated virtue from temptation. His genius was not in breaking the rules recklessly, but in bending them beautifully. He understood that the thrill of seduction didn't come from conquest, it came from the risk. The excitement wasn't just about the person, it was about the danger of wanting them. The hidden glances, the stolen moments, the slow unfolding of what was never meant to happen. It was the taste of rebellion, disguised as romance. Psychologists call this phenomenon reactance, our instinctive resistance to control. The moment someone tries to limit our choices, the forbidden option becomes the most desirable one. This explains why the forbidden fruit has always been the sweetest, from the Garden of Eden to the quiet corners of every love story. When society says, "Don't," the subconscious hears, "Prove that you can." And in that small act of defiance, we rediscover our autonomy. Casanova's brilliance lay in his ability to awaken this sense of autonomy in others. He didn't demand attraction, he invited rebellion. He made people feel that by choosing him, they were choosing themselves. That was the real seduction, not submission, but liberation. His presence whispered, "You are not bound by their rules here." And in that space, where morality loosened its grip and curiosity took over, desire ignited like fire catching dry leaves. But Casanova also knew that this game was dangerous. The same moral boundaries that created passion could also create guilt. And guilt, when handled wrongly, kills desire. Yet when handled skillfully, it transforms it. He didn't fight against guilt, he used it. He turned it into intimacy. The very thing that made someone feel ashamed also made them feel alive. He let them believe that their secret was safe with him, that their darkness wasn't to be feared but embraced. In his arms, guilt became permission. What society called sin, he turned into connection. There is something deeply psychological about this process. Guilt, in its essence, is emotional friction, a tension between what we feel and what we think we should feel. But friction is also what creates heat. When guilt and desire collide, the result is intensity. Casanova's mastery was in keeping that tension alive, never too heavy to suffocate, never too light to lose its spark. He made transgression feel sacred, as if crossing the line wasn't rebellion but revelation. This dynamic still shapes human behavior today. Every secret relationship, every impulsive attraction, every thrill of doing something wrong is built on the same foundation. The forbidden amplifies feeling. When something is restricted, it focuses attention. When something is scarce, it becomes valuable. What we can't easily have becomes what we can't stop thinking about. That's the engine of obsession. Casanova played that engine like a musician plays a violin, drawing emotion from tension, not release. He would create distance, hint at danger, then offer reassurance just when fear began to rise. It was a psychological rhythm: build tension, release tension, rebuild it again. He made people feel both nervous and safe, both sinful and desired. In that contrast, attraction reached its peak. It wasn't about logic, it was about chemistry, an alchemy of shame, curiosity, and pleasure. But beneath all of this lies a simple truth: what we suppress doesn't disappear, it intensifies. The more we deny an emotion, the stronger it becomes in the shadows. Casanova knew that desire, like fire, burns brighter when starved of air. He didn't fight against that darkness, he invited it into the light, gave it form, gave it purpose. That's why his lovers remembered him long after he was gone. He didn't just touch their bodies, he gave them permission to feel everything they weren't allowed to. There is a modern lesson in that. We live in an age that still shames desire, still fears vulnerability, still punishes honesty about what we want. But the more we repress those truths, the more they control us. The secret to mastery, whether in love or psychology, is not to eliminate the forbidden, but to understand it. To know why certain things feel dangerous. To know where your boundaries end and where someone else's begin. To play with tension without crossing into harm. That is where maturity meets mystery. Casanova's forbidden art wasn't about breaking people, it was about awakening them. He showed that desire, when explored consciously, can become a mirror of the soul. That the parts of ourselves we're told to hide are often the ones that make us human. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to stop pretending you're immune to temptation, and instead, learn to understand it. So the next time you find yourself drawn to something, or someone, you think you shouldn't want, pause and ask why. The answer might not be in the object of desire, but in the feeling of freedom it represents. Casanova knew that what we truly crave isn't forbidden love, it's the freedom to feel without fear. Chapter 5, Touch as Hypnosis, the Sensory Gateway to the Mind. The mind does not open through logic. It opens through sensation. Every idea, every emotion, every moment of trust begins with what the body feels. That is why touch, when used with awareness, becomes something far greater than contact, it becomes hypnosis. The paradox is simple: what we think of as physical is actually the most direct path into the subconscious. Casanova understood this instinctively. He didn't hypnotize with words but with presence. His gestures were deliberate, slow, calculated not to rush the moment but to stretch it. Every touch he gave was a sentence written on the skin, a subtle command, a suggestion, a message that bypassed the rational mind. He knew that the body, when touched with the right balance of intensity and patience, slips naturally into a trance-like state. And in that state, reason softens, and emotion takes the lead. Light touch is the key. When someone touches you gently, your brain doesn't read it as pressure, it reads it as attention. The nervous system lights up in curiosity, not fear. That delicate tension, the question of what comes next, draws awareness inward. The world around fades, focus narrows, and suddenly the smallest movement feels amplified. This is how hypnosis begins, not with power over someone, but with control of their focus. The more you guide their attention, the more you guide their mind. Think about it. A whisper is more hypnotic than a shout. A slow movement is more magnetic than a sudden one. The mind craves rhythm, not chaos. When touch arrives slowly, deliberately, with care, it sends a message of control and safety at the same time. That combination, dominance without threat, is what creates trust. And trust is the foundation of influence. Casanova was a master of calibration. He adjusted his touch the way a musician adjusts sound. He knew that intensity is not about force, it's about timing. A touch too quick feels accidental. Too firm feels aggressive. But the perfect touch, slow, sustained, confident, creates surrender. He never rushed. He let anticipation do the work. The longer someone waited for contact, the deeper their body fell into the moment. By the time he reached them, they were already under his spell. This isn't magic, it's conditioning. Every physical sensation creates an emotional echo. When you pair a feeling with a state of mind, you anchor them together. A hand on the shoulder during laughter makes that gesture a symbol of joy. A soft touch during reassurance turns that same contact into comfort. Over time, the body learns to respond automatically. Just one repeated touch can trigger the same emotion again and again, long after the original moment has passed. This is the foundation of physical anchoring, an ancient psychological mechanism that shapes how we bond, trust, and remember. Casanova used it with precision. When he touched someone, he wasn't just reaching for them, he was programming them. Each touch became a marker in their memory. A brush of the hand during a smile. A pause of the fingers during silence. A gentle hold after a confession. Each one linked to an emotion, and later, when he repeated the same gesture, that emotion returned instantly. It wasn't manipulation as much as mastery, the understanding that emotion can be summoned like music through repetition and intent. Slow motion was his secret weapon. Most people move quickly because they fear stillness. But slowness demands presence. When someone moves slowly, every second becomes charged. The watcher's mind begins to fill the silence with imagination. They start anticipating, projecting, longing. Slowness gives the illusion of control, but it also invites surrender. Casanova made every movement intentional, lifting a hand, turning his gaze, even removing a glove became theater. He made time itself obey him. Touch as hypnosis is not just about desire, it's about depth. When used ethically, it teaches us to listen through sensation, to connect beyond words. Most people touch without awareness, but conscious touch is a form of communication. It says, I see you. I'm here. You can let go. When done right, it doesn't take power, it gives peace. But when used without empathy, it becomes a weapon. The same technique that builds intimacy can also breed dependence. That's why awareness is everything. Casanova often walked that fine line between love and manipulation. He could make someone feel seen in a way that no one else had, but that same intensity left them marked. His touch became a spell that lingered even when he was gone. It wasn't the memory of his face that haunted people, it was the way their body had felt in his presence. That's the true mark of hypnotic influence. It doesn't live in thought, it lives in sensation. Science now confirms what Casanova practiced intuitively. Gentle, rhythmic touch slows the heartbeat, lowers stress hormones, and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural, calm response. This biological shift mirrors what hypnotists aim to achieve: focused attention, heightened receptivity, emotional openness. The body relaxes, and the mind follows. In that vulnerable calm, suggestion becomes power. But there's a warning in this knowledge. Once you understand how easily touch can alter emotion, you must decide how to use that power. Every touch is a message, every gesture a seed. If you plant them with selfish intent, they will grow into confusion and pain. If you plant them with care, they can grow into trust and connection. Influence, at its highest form, is not control, it's resonance. Casanova's mastery wasn't in his ability to dominate, it was in his ability to attune. He read energy, matched breathing, moved in harmony with another person's rhythm until his presence felt inevitable. That's the essence of hypnotic touch. It doesn't force, it aligns. And when two people align, even briefly, the world disappears. Touch is hypnosis because it reminds us of what the mind forgets, that we are creatures of sensation before thought. We crave warmth, rhythm, reassurance. And in that craving lies our openness, our vulnerability, our humanity. Casanova's legacy is not that he conquered hearts, it's that he learned how to awaken them. Chapter 6, The Emotional Mirror, Reading Responses Before They're Spoken. Before words reveal truth, the body whispers it. Every shift of posture, every flicker in the eyes, every pause between breaths is a message. People think they speak with their mouths, but the body is always speaking first, and it never lies. The paradox is simple: we spend our lives trying to find honesty in words, yet it's written plainly in silence. Casanova lived by that truth. He didn't listen to what people said, he listened to what they meant. He could read the room the way a sailor reads the sea, watching for the smallest ripple that revealed what lay beneath. When someone smiled, he noticed whether their shoulders relaxed or tightened. When someone laughed, he felt whether it was genuine release or a nervous cover. His mastery came not from speaking beautifully, but from seeing deeply. That was his real hypnosis, not his touch, but his perception. The body is a mirror of the mind. You can tell when someone is open by the way they lean forward, or when they retreat inside themselves by how they cross their arms. A slight turn of the foot can signal readiness to leave. The eyes, though, are the truest messengers. They dilate with interest, narrow with suspicion, drop with submission. Casanova studied these signs like sacred scripture. He didn't analyze them mechanically, he felt them, intuitively, as if his own body was tuning itself to theirs. That's what made him magnetic. His emotional awareness wasn't cold observation, it was empathy disguised as attention. To connect with another person on this level, you must learn to quiet your own noise. The mind that is busy cannot read. Casanova practiced presence like an artist sharpening his instrument. He entered every encounter as though nothing else existed, focusing entirely on the rhythm of another person's breathing, the pattern of their words, the tension in their hands. When you watch closely enough, people begin to reveal what they hide even from themselves. A single glance can show longing, a single hesitation can expose fear. He also understood that every emotion leaves a physical echo. Curiosity makes people tilt their heads. Interest softens the voice. Resistance shows in the jaw, the hands, the way someone suddenly becomes aware of their own body. Casanova used these microreactions to navigate the delicate balance between comfort and tension. If he saw resistance, he slowed down. If he saw curiosity, he advanced just enough to feed it. He never forced connection, he invited it, reading each response like a compass that pointed toward emotional truth. This was the heart of his influence, emotional mirroring. When he noticed someone's energy, he matched it, not to manipulate, but to build resonance. If they were anxious, he calmed his voice. If they were shy, he softened his eyes. When they grew animated, he met their rhythm with his own enthusiasm. The subconscious loves reflection. We trust those who reflect us. The mind interprets this alignment as safety. This person understands me, it says. And that moment of recognition opens the door to intimacy. But Casanova went further. He could lead emotion by first matching it. Like a dancer guiding a partner, he would step into someone's emotional state until they felt seen, then slowly shift his tone, his gestures, his energy toward where he wanted the moment to go. Without realizing it, the other person would follow. It was the psychology of rapport, so seamless it felt like chemistry. In truth, it was awareness and timing disguised as magic. The most powerful connections are invisible. They happen not in words, but in shared rhythm. When two people breathe in sync, when their body language begins to mirror unconsciously, they enter what psychologists call interpersonal resonance. It feels effortless, like you've known someone for years after a single hour. Casanova mastered this illusion. He didn't rely on charm alone, he built harmony. His body, his tone, even his stillness all mirrored the emotional wavelength of the person in front of him until their nervous systems began to speak the same unspoken language. You can see this mirrored energy everywhere: two friends leaning toward each other in conversation, lovers sitting with matching posture, a leader and follower unconsciously aligning their pace. It's not acting, it's biology. The brain releases oxytocin when it feels mirrored, the same chemical that creates attachment between parent and child. Casanova used that natural process as his instrument. By reflecting what others felt, he made them feel safe in their vulnerability. Once safety was established, desire could unfold freely. But he also knew how fragile this balance was. One misread signal could shatter the illusion. If his energy overpowered, they pulled back. If his stillness lingered too long, curiosity turned to suspicion. He walked the line between confidence and arrogance, between warmth and control, between attention and obsession. The secret wasn't perfection, it was responsiveness. He adjusted constantly, reading not the person they pretended to be, but the one their body betrayed. The emotional mirror is the oldest form of seduction because it's the foundation of understanding. When someone feels seen, truly seen, they let down the walls that years of judgment have built. They stop performing. They start revealing. That's the moment real connection begins. It's not about saying the right thing, it's about noticing the truth beneath what's said. Casanova's greatest secret wasn't manipulation, it was presence. He had the patience to observe, the discipline to listen, and the intuition to respond without forcing. That's what made people feel drawn to him even when they knew his reputation. They didn't fall for his words, they fell for the way he made them feel understood. And that understanding wasn't mystical. It was the product of sensitivity, timing, and attention refined into an art. You can practice the same awareness in everyday life. The next time you speak to someone, watch their eyes when you talk about something personal. Notice their breathing, their shoulders, their silence. Feel the rhythm between you. If you can mirror it with care, not mimicry, but empathy, you'll discover that influence is never about power. It's about alignment. Casanova's dark psychology wasn't about deceit, it was about decoding the unspoken world that most people ignore. The world where emotion lives before it becomes language. He didn't control people, he understood them so deeply that they wanted to be understood by him in return. That's the essence of invisible rapport. It's not a performance, it's permission. Chapter 7: The Dark Side of Emotional Bonding. Love and control are separated by a line so thin you rarely see it, until you've already crossed it. The most dangerous kind of manipulation doesn't come from cruelty, but from care. It hides behind affection, behind understanding, behind the comforting lie that connection is always good. But connection, in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon that wraps its target in warmth before tightening its grip. Casanova understood this better than anyone. He knew that when you give someone the feeling of being completely understood, they stop questioning you. They begin to crave you, not for pleasure, but for peace. That's how emotional control begins, not with force, but with fulfillment. You become the only source of calm in their storm. You turn their dependence into devotion. And they thank you for it. In the psychology of seduction, emotional bonding is the most powerful form of influence. When two people share vulnerability, when they open their fears and pain, their nervous systems synchronize. The body releases oxytocin, the same chemical that bonds infants to their mothers. It creates a sensation of safety so deep that reason fades into background noise. You start believing that the person who comforts you owns the comfort itself. Casanova used this to perfection. He didn't win hearts through flattery or force, he won them through empathy so precise it felt divine. He could mirror pain without judgment, listen with patience that felt holy. His presence dissolved loneliness, and in that relief, people surrendered their emotional independence. They believed he was healing them, when in truth, he was studying them, learning their emotional triggers, mapping their fears, their needs, their quiet longings. His compassion was real, but it was also strategic. He offered warmth not as a gift, but as an anchor. And once anchored, few could let go. The danger of dependency begins when comfort becomes currency. You start equating another person's attention with safety. You stop thinking clearly when they withdraw it. The same touch that soothed you yesterday now becomes punishment when it's gone. This is emotional addiction, when your peace depends on someone else's approval. Casanova cultivated it carefully. He knew that love, when starved and fed on his schedule, turned into obsession. A brief absence amplified longing, a sudden return magnified gratitude. He didn't need chains, he had chemistry. But here lies the tragedy, even manipulators fall victim to their own games. The more Casanova made others dependent, the lonelier he became. Genuine connection requires equality, and he had built a world of worshippers, not partners. Every bond he created was a mirror of control, beautiful, intoxicating, and hollow. The moment someone loved him freely, without the spell of his influence, he grew restless. Because for a man who lives by manipulation, real love feels like surrender. There's a deep psychological truth here. The same instincts that make us capable of love also make us vulnerable to control. The human brain is wired to seek emotional safety, and the person who provides it becomes sacred. This is why emotional manipulators don't attack, they protect. They don't shout, they soothe. They don't demand, they understand. And that's what makes them so hard to resist. They turn love into dependence by convincing you that without them, you wouldn't feel whole. Casanova's manipulative compassion was not cruelty in the traditional sense. It was artful empathy, an understanding of how much people need to be seen. He gave them that gift fully, knowing they would give him everything in return. He played the savior so well that they never saw the strings attached. And yet, part of his power came from sincerity. He truly did care, at least in the moment. But his caring was transient, a candle that burned brightly before moving to the next shadow. His compassion wasn't false, it was temporary. This duality, the ability to both feel and use emotion, is what makes dark psychology so dangerous. When empathy becomes a tactic, it ceases to heal. It hypnotizes. And those who use it forget that they, too, are human. They start believing in their own myth, that they can manage every heart without consequence, that they can escape the emotional debris they leave behind. But nobody escapes untouched. Even the manipulator becomes haunted by the ghosts of their own making. To understand this darkness is to walk a moral tightrope. Influence itself is not evil. Every teacher, leader, and lover uses it. The danger lies in intention. Do you guide someone toward growth, or toward your own gain? Do you offer comfort as connection, or as control? The line is defined not by technique, but by empathy, the kind that respects freedom as much as it craves closeness. Casanova's brilliance turned tragic because he forgot that true connection requires choice. Without freedom, love becomes possession. Ethical influence is the art of awareness. It's the ability to see the power you hold in someone's emotions and choose not to exploit it. Real mastery is not in making people feel dependent, it's in helping them feel safe enough to stand on their own. The greatest seducers, the ones who truly understand psychology, know that letting someone go willingly is the ultimate proof of influence. Casanova's life teaches both the seducer and the seduced a vital lesson: never confuse intensity with intimacy. The strongest emotions are not always the truest. Sometimes, what feels like destiny is just chemistry. Sometimes, what feels like love is a mirror of your own unmet needs. To protect yourself, learn to recognize the signs of emotional addiction, the highs and lows, the anxiety, the constant need for reassurance. Love should calm you, not consume you. For those who use influence, know that power without ethics destroys both the giver and the receiver. You can touch someone's heart without owning it. You can connect deeply without controlling. True mastery, the kind that Casanova never fully reached, lies not in holding others under your spell but in freeing them from it. Chapter 8: The Forbidden Framework, Steps to Subconscious Connection. Real influence doesn't begin with touch, it begins with awareness. The greatest seducers don't chase, they observe. They move through a room like a mirror, quietly absorbing the energy around them until they understand every current beneath the surface. That is the paradox of true connection. To gain control, you must first surrender your need for it. Casanova's power wasn't born from beauty or boldness. It came from patience, the discipline to wait before acting. When he entered a room, he didn't immediately seek attention, he let attention seek him. His eyes scanned not out of hunger but of curiosity. Every gesture, every tone, every subtle shift of someone's breathing told him who they were before they spoke. He watched how people leaned toward or away from conversation, how laughter rang genuine or hollow. Observation was his reconnaissance, his way of learning a person's unspoken language. To understand someone deeply, you must first learn to see them without trying to be seen. Once he observed, Casanova began calibration. Every emotional encounter is like music, you don't play the same note twice. Some people respond to warmth, others to mystery. Some crave reassurance, others crave challenge. Casanova listened for emotional tone the way a musician listens for pitch. If someone was guarded, he softened his energy; if they were bold, he met their fire with quiet composure. This wasn't acting, it was attunement. When you calibrate to another person's emotional wavelength, you tell their nervous system, "You are safe here." That is the foundation of subconscious connection. When the energy between two people feels balanced, touch can enter the equation, not as intrusion, but as permission. Casanova introduced touch with surgical precision. A light graze of the fingertips, a playful nudge, a brush of hands as laughter rose, each moment designed to test the subconscious threshold. Too much too soon breaks the illusion, too little and it never begins. But when done with awareness, touch becomes a form of silent dialogue. It says what words can't: I see you. I feel you. You can trust me. The secret was not the touch itself, but timing. Casanova's gestures never felt random. They appeared effortless, but each one was carefully placed to reinforce emotion. This is what psychologists now call anchoring. When you pair a physical cue with an emotional state, the body links them permanently. Imagine comforting someone during laughter and gently touching their arm. Later, that same touch will trigger the memory of joy. Casanova used this instinctively. He created invisible loops of emotion through contact, associating himself with feelings of warmth, excitement, or relief. Over time, the mind began to respond to him as it would to the feeling itself. Anchoring is one of the most powerful psychological tools because it works below awareness. The conscious mind may forget the reason for trust, but the body remembers. Casanova became a living symbol of emotional relief. His presence alone could shift someone's state of mind because their nervous system had already been trained to respond to him. That is how touch transcends the physical, it becomes psychological. But the real magic happened when he combined anchoring with mirroring. Mirroring is the invisible bridge between two psyches. When two people synchronize their posture, breathing, and tone, the body interprets it as deep understanding. Casanova mirrored not as a tactic, but as an art. He matched energy so precisely that people felt seen in ways they never had before. When they leaned forward, he leaned just slightly closer. When they slowed their speech, he matched their rhythm. This was empathy transformed into influence, the ability to move someone emotionally by simply reflecting their own state back to them. Mirroring deepens rapport because it tells the subconscious, we are the same. Once that belief takes root, resistance disappears. The person stops evaluating you as a stranger and begins experiencing you as part of their inner circle. Casanova's genius was not domination, it was blending. He disappeared into the energy of others until their guard dropped completely. And when that happened, the connection felt fated, not forced. This entire framework, observation, calibration, touch, mirroring, anchoring, was not a formula of manipulation but a map of awareness. Each step flowed into the next with patience and intuition. Casanova didn't move through these stages mechanically, he moved through them rhythmically, letting each person's energy dictate the pace. That's why his influence felt natural, not strategic. People never felt controlled by him, they felt chosen. The psychology behind this is timeless. Humans crave recognition more than perfection. When someone looks at us and truly understands what we feel, we attach. That's why the forbidden framework works, it fulfills a primal need. But with great awareness comes great responsibility. The same tools that build connection can easily cross into control if guided by selfish intent. Casanova danced on that edge, his gift for reading and responding made him irresistible, but it also made him dangerous. He could make people feel understood while subtly steering their emotions toward his desired outcome. That's why understanding this framework is not just about seduction, it's about ethics. True mastery lies not in using these principles to manipulate, but to connect. When you observe, do it with empathy, not agenda. When you calibrate, do it to create harmony, not advantage. When you touch, do it with respect for permission, not hunger for power. Influence becomes manipulation only when awareness loses compassion. Casanova's dark psychology reminds us that the line between love and control is not in what we do, but why we do it. At its core, the forbidden framework is about presence. It's about slowing down enough to notice the signals others miss, to feel the rhythm beneath words, to honor the fragile dance of attention and emotion that defines every human encounter. Whether in love, leadership, or friendship, this awareness transforms relationships into something richer, something that moves below the surface. Chapter 9: The Casanova Effect, Turning Touch into Power. Real power never announces itself. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't chase. It whispers, and the world leans closer to hear. That's the paradox of true dominance: the more quietly it's expressed, the louder it echoes. Casanova understood this long before psychology gave it words. His influence wasn't in what he said, but in the tension he created, the unspoken gravity between confidence and restraint, warmth and distance, presence and mystery. To those around him, Casanova seemed effortless. He could walk into a room and command attention without trying. He didn't dominate through force, he guided energy through poise. The Casanova effect is this exact art, the transformation of touch, silence, and awareness into psychological authority. It's about mastering the subtle balance between connection and control, between being desired and being unreachable. Touch, when used with awareness, becomes a declaration of power. Most people touch impulsively, driven by emotion or habit. Casanova touched strategically. He understood that human beings crave what feels rare, not what feels common. A glance that almost becomes a touch, a gesture that lingers but never claims, these moments hold more influence than any overt act. Restraint is seductive because it gives the imagination space to burn. The less you take, the more people offer. Psychological dominance through subtlety begins with energy, not words. The person who can stay calm in emotional storms becomes the anchor others gravitate toward. Casanova's composure was his crown. In conversation, he didn't rush to fill silence. He let others reveal themselves, their insecurities, their needs, their hunger for approval. And while they did, he remained still, listening, watching, guiding with the smallest cues. His calmness created imbalance. People wanted to earn his emotion because he didn't give it freely. That is power, not control through fear, but through selective vulnerability. Confidence, in Casanova's world, was not arrogance. It was precision. He moved with the certainty of someone who knew his own value and didn't need validation. But confidence without restraint becomes noise. So he paired it with quiet discipline, with the ability to withhold, to delay, to let curiosity build until attention became addiction. This is the paradox of power: the moment you stop needing to prove it, everyone feels it. He also mastered the paradox of availability and mystery. Casanova was present enough to feel real, yet distant enough to remain intriguing. He gave people glimpses, not the whole story. They saw parts of his vulnerability, a brief confession, a passing sadness, but never the full map of his soul. That's what made him unforgettable. People fall not for perfection, but for depth they can't quite reach. Mystery creates emotional gravity. It keeps the mind circling around unanswered questions. In modern psychology, this dynamic is called intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable alternation between closeness and distance that makes the brain crave more. Casanova embodied it intuitively. One moment, warm and attentive; the next, quietly withdrawn. Each shift reignited fascination. The uncertainty wasn't cruelty, it was chemistry. It turned attention into obsession, because what's unpredictable feels alive. Power in attraction is not about taking control, it's about setting rhythm. Casanova used his presence like a conductor uses silence. Every look, every word, every pause had purpose. When he spoke softly, people leaned in. When he paused, their hearts filled the silence. This is the essence of psychological seduction: control the tempo, and you control emotion. Whether in love, influence, or leadership, rhythm defines perception. Fast movements suggest nervousness, slow ones suggest certainty. And nothing captures attention like someone who moves as if time bends around them. The Casanova effect also lives in posture and intention. He never touched without purpose. When he did, it wasn't random, it was symbolic. A hand on a shoulder could mean reassurance. A brush of fingers could signal invitation. Every gesture carried subtext. And because he combined confidence with restraint, each touch felt magnified. The rarest currency is attention, and he spent it sparingly. That's why people remembered him long after he was gone. He made every moment feel deliberate. Underneath all this lies an unspoken truth: power dynamics fuel attraction because they mimic the primal structure of safety and tension. The one who remains composed becomes the emotional center, the one who reacts becomes orbit. Casanova understood this instinctively. His restraint wasn't cruelty, it was control of energy. He gave just enough warmth to make others approach, just enough distance to make them chase. And when they reached for him, he mirrored their desire back to them, making them believe it had always been theirs. But the Casanova effect isn't just about seduction, it's about psychology. It teaches us that attention is magnetic when it's intentional. That mystery is more powerful than constant exposure. That restraint creates depth where excess creates fatigue. In a world that rewards overexpression, true influence belongs to those who know when not to act, when to let silence build pressure, when to let anticipation do the work of words. Casanova's touch was not dominance through force, it was dominance through awareness. He didn't control people, he controlled the space between them. He understood that power isn't found in taking, but in knowing when to stop. Every relationship he built was a reflection of this principle. He gave people what they didn't know they needed until they couldn't imagine life without it. That's why his legend endures, not because he conquered, but because he connected in ways few dare to. There's a lesson here for anyone who seeks influence, whether in love or in life. Power is not about being louder, faster, or more impressive. It's about the mastery of self, the ability to read emotion, manage timing, and project calm even when chaos surrounds you. The Casanova effect is not a formula for manipulation, it's a reminder that presence, awareness, and restraint are far more powerful than performance. Chapter 10: Seduction Beyond the Physical. True seduction doesn't begin with the body, it begins with attention. It's not the touch that captivates, but the space before it. The silence. The glance. The moment suspended between words when the mind starts to imagine what hasn't happened yet. That's the secret Casanova understood better than anyone. Desire isn't physical first, it's psychological. The body follows where the imagination leads. To seduce beyond the physical is to awaken all the senses without rushing to satisfy them. Casanova used words like an artist uses light, not to describe, but to reveal. His voice was never hurried. He spoke as if every sentence was a secret being slowly unwrapped. He knew that language has texture, that tone, rhythm, and breath can touch before the skin ever does. When he told stories, he didn't just share experiences, he created emotional mirrors where others saw themselves reflected. His storytelling wasn't about him, it was about you. It invited your imagination to wander into the same world he was building. This was his invisible foreplay. He seduced through story, not because stories entertain, but because they transport. They lower defenses. When someone listens deeply, their heart rate synchronizes to the storyteller's rhythm. Their attention narrows. The rest of the world fades away. In that shared trance, every word becomes a form of contact. You feel seen, known, understood, and in that state, the distance between minds disappears before bodies ever meet. But Casanova's genius wasn't only verbal, it was environmental. He turned atmosphere into an accomplice. He understood that seduction is a sensory orchestra where sight, scent, and sound harmonize to create emotional immersion. The glow of a candle, the softness of fabric, the subtle rhythm of his voice, all worked together to make the body feel safe while the mind wandered into desire. He never underestimated the power of scent, the invisible sense that goes straight to memory and emotion. He chose fragrances that lingered faintly, leaving traces of him in the air even after he was gone. The scent became his signature, something people remembered without realizing why. Sight, too, was part of his silent language. He didn't dress extravagantly, but deliberately. His colors, his movements, even the way he held a gaze were all calibrated to communicate poise and control. When you looked at him, you saw balance, the combination of confidence and calm. That visual steadiness is hypnotic because it feels like safety wrapped in danger. It tells the subconscious, this person knows exactly who they are. And self-assurance, more than beauty, is what makes attraction inevitable. Sound played its part as well. He never competed with noise, he became the quiet that drew attention. When he spoke softly, others leaned in. When he paused, silence became magnetic. Casanova mastered rhythm not just in words but in energy. The way he moved, breathed, and looked at someone had musicality. He understood that seduction, at its highest level, is not conversation, it's choreography. Two nervous systems synchronizing, two emotional currents finding the same pulse. He also knew the danger of excess. Physical attraction burns quickly when it's fed too fast. Emotional and sensory seduction, however, grows slowly, rooting itself in memory. Casanova never wanted quick pleasure, he wanted permanence. That's why he valued proximity over possession. To sit close but not touch, to speak softly enough that someone has to lean in, to build tension and then retreat, these are the moments that stay. The mind fills the gaps with imagination, and imagination always paints in colors stronger than reality. What made his influence almost supernatural was his control of rhythm, the dance between presence and distance. He didn't overwhelm the senses, he orchestrated them. When he used touch, it wasn't isolated, it was layered on top of the emotional landscape he had already created. A brush of fingers after an hour of conversation meant more than any embrace could. The touch became the punctuation to a story that had been building in silence. In modern terms, we would call this psychological priming. By stimulating emotion, curiosity, and imagination through language and atmosphere, Casanova prepared the mind to feel before the body ever reacted. This is why his presence lingered long after he left. He didn't just touch the body, he trained the nervous system to respond to his memory. Every scent, every tone, every shadow that resembled him became a trigger. The experience of him became self-reinforcing, each recollection reigniting the original feeling. That is seduction beyond the physical, to live rent-free inside another person's senses. And yet, this level of influence requires responsibility. Casanova's art, at its darkest, blurred the line between enchantment and manipulation. He could make people feel alive, but he could also make them dependent. When you learn to play the senses like instruments, you hold a power few understand, the ability to create emotional realities. The danger is forgetting that those realities have consequences. Every moment of closeness you create shapes how someone sees themselves. Used with empathy, this art heals loneliness and inspires confidence. Used selfishly, it breeds obsession and emptiness. True mastery lies in restraint. The seducer who evolves beyond the physical learns to use this awareness not to control, but to connect. To speak with tone that calms, to create silence that heals, to build tension that leads to understanding rather than conquest. Seduction in its purest form is not about taking, it's about awakening. It reminds another person of the parts of themselves they've forgotten how to feel. Casanova's legacy, stripped of myth, is not the story of a conqueror, it's the story of someone who understood the human psyche with extraordinary sensitivity. He taught that real desire begins with attention. That the most intimate form of touch is not the hand, but the mind. That to see someone fully, to make them feel alive in your presence, is to offer a kind of connection deeper than any physical act could express. Seduction beyond the physical is the art of presence. It's the discipline of being fully alive in front of another person. When you master that, you no longer need to chase connection, it comes to you naturally. Because what people are drawn to most isn't beauty or charm, it's the rare experience of being seen, heard, and felt at the same time. Chapter 11, Breaking the Spell, When Seduction Becomes Manipulation. Every spell begins with wonder. It starts as connection, curiosity, fascination, the moment you feel seen so deeply that you forget to guard yourself. But every spell, no matter how beautiful, carries a shadow. What begins as intimacy can quietly turn into control. And that is the danger of seduction. It doesn't need cruelty to become manipulation. All it needs is the absence of empathy. Casanova knew the line well. He lived on it. His art was built on sensitivity, on making people feel understood and alive. Yet in that power to awaken others lay a temptation even greater than desire, the temptation to play God with emotion. When you can move hearts with words, when you can change minds with a glance, the question becomes not can you use that power, but should you? Manipulation rarely feels like manipulation at first. It feels like chemistry, like connection that's different. It begins when someone starts managing your emotions more than you do, deciding when you feel loved, when you feel guilty, when you feel seen. Casanova's darker side knew how to use this rhythm perfectly. He could lift someone's mood with attention, then withdraw it to create longing. He could mirror empathy not to comfort, but to capture. He made people feel safe so he could shape their behavior without resistance. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about control disguised as care. That's what makes toxic influence so dangerous, it hides inside tenderness. It looks like concern, sounds like understanding, and feels like safety. But if you listen closely, it always demands something in return, your energy, your loyalty, your silence. Casanova understood that emotional dependency is stronger than physical desire. When someone makes you feel deeply, you'll forgive almost anything to keep that feeling alive. He used that truth as both his weapon and his downfall. The line between influence and exploitation is invisible until you cross it. Influence invites choice, exploitation removes it. Influence empowers, manipulation weakens. The difference lies in intention. Casanova could make people open their hearts, but too often he entered not to honor what he found, but to rearrange it. That is the shadow side of dark psychology. It teaches control without conscience, mastery without morality. And when connection becomes control, love becomes obedience. Modern psychology now confirms what Casanova practiced centuries ago: emotional awareness can be used for healing or harm. The ability to read micro-expressions, anticipate needs, and evoke emotion can build intimacy, or dependency. The same understanding that allows a therapist to comfort can allow a manipulator to dominate. That's why emotional intelligence, without ethics, is one of the most dangerous forms of intelligence there is. To defend yourself, you don't need to become colder, you need to become clearer. The ultimate defense is awareness. Notice how you feel around people. Manipulation thrives in confusion. True connection brings clarity. If you constantly second-guess your worth, your memory, or your emotions after spending time with someone, you're not loved, you're being managed. Casanova's victims often described feeling enchanted, yet disoriented, as if their thoughts weren't fully their own. That's the hallmark of psychological control. It feels like surrender disguised as love. Awareness breaks the spell because it reclaims the narrative. When you see the structure behind charm, the pauses, the calculated touch, the shifts in tone, you begin to understand that influence is mechanical. And once you see the mechanism, it loses its magic. The manipulator's greatest fear is not rejection, it's recognition. The moment you see them clearly, their power fades. But breaking the spell isn't only about protecting yourself, it's also about taking responsibility for your own influence. Each of us holds the same potential to manipulate as to connect. Every compliment, every silence, every act of empathy carries weight. The ethics of persuasion are not abstract, they are personal. Casanova's story reminds us that influence is sacred territory. To enter someone's emotions is to walk on holy ground. You can either plant seeds of trust or leave scars of control. The choice defines the kind of power you hold. The tragedy of Casanova's legacy is not that he was a manipulator, but that he was capable of more. He had the power to create genuine connection, to heal the loneliness of others, but he often used that power to fill his own emptiness. The seducer who cannot love himself always ends up using others as mirrors, mistaking admiration for intimacy. His touch connected, but it also consumed. His attention healed, but it also hollowed. Every manipulator is, in truth, someone afraid of being powerless. The real mastery, the evolution beyond dark psychology, is emotional integrity, the ability to understand emotion without exploiting it. When you can feel someone's vulnerability and still choose not to use it for gain, you have transcended Casanova's shadow. That is what separates the manipulator from the master. The manipulator takes without care. The master influences with conscience. One steals energy, the other exchanges it. Seduction becomes manipulation the moment empathy dies. And empathy dies when curiosity turns into calculation. To remain human, to remain free, you must protect that empathy, even when you hold power. Influence, when used with compassion, is art. When used without it, it's poison. Casanova's life was a lesson in both. His brilliance illuminated the path to emotional understanding. His flaws warned of what happens when understanding becomes control. He reminds us that the forbidden touch, when stripped of care, becomes a cage. But when guided by respect, it becomes connection, a language that elevates both souls instead of enslaving them. Breaking the spell, then, isn't about avoiding connection, it's about choosing conscious connection. It's about knowing that the greatest seduction is honesty, and the most magnetic energy is authenticity. When you no longer need to manipulate, you become truly powerful. Because the one who can touch hearts without breaking them will always be remembered, not as a manipulator, but as a mirror of truth. Conclusion: Casanova's eternal lesson. Every story of power begins with the same truth: connection is both our greatest gift and our greatest danger. The ability to reach into another person's emotions, to awaken what sleeps beneath their surface, can either heal or destroy. Casanova lived his life walking that edge. He proved that influence isn't about domination, it's about understanding the invisible strings that bind one human heart to another. And yet, his life is also a warning of what happens when mastery loses morality. The power of subconscious connection is timeless. Long before science could explain hormones, neurons, and attachment chemistry, Casanova understood them instinctively. Modern psychology now confirms what he practiced centuries ago: our emotions are shaped not by logic, but by invisible exchanges of energy, tone, rhythm, gaze, touch. We decide with our bodies before we ever decide with our minds. He used this truth as both weapon and art, creating attraction not through words but through atmosphere. But here's the paradox he never conquered: the same awareness that gives you power can also take your humanity. To see into people so deeply that you can move them without effort, if you forget compassion, that insight becomes manipulation. Casanova could open hearts, but he often left them broken. He could build trust in seconds, yet destroy it just as fast. His story reminds us that mastery without conscience is merely control wearing perfume. True mastery is influence without harm. It's knowing how to create emotion while respecting its cost. The real seducer doesn't use awareness to deceive, they use it to elevate. They notice the subtle, they speak gently, they touch intentionally. They understand that presence itself can heal loneliness more deeply than desire ever could. Power used this way becomes grace, an invisible strength that leaves others stronger, not smaller, after you've touched their lives. Casanova's eternal lesson is not about seduction, it's about self-awareness. The moment you understand your own psychology, your own triggers, your own hunger for validation, you stop being a puppet to other people's games. Awareness makes you irresistible because it frees you from need. You no longer chase approval, you create calm. You no longer manipulate emotions, you master them. That kind of energy draws people in naturally, not through force, but through balance. In the end, Casanova's legacy is both beautiful and haunting. He showed us that to connect is divine, but to control is dangerous. The same fire that warms can burn, the same truth that frees can wound. The art of dark psychology is not to reject it, but to understand it, to hold it with responsibility, to recognize its mirror in ourselves. Because every one of us carries a little of Casanova within, the part that wants to be admired, the part that fears being forgotten, the part that reaches for love but sometimes mistakes it for power. So remember this, awareness is the new seduction. The person who understands themselves will always understand others. The one who controls their own emotions will never be controlled. Influence, at its highest form, is empathy sharpened by knowledge. And that is the kind of power that never fades. If this book spoke to something inside you, if it made you see the invisible patterns behind connection, attraction, and influence, stay with us. Subscribe, share, and keep listening, because the real story doesn't end with Casanova. It begins with you, your awareness, your choices, and the quiet power you hold to touch minds, hearts, and lives without ever losing your own.